to be hosted by Joe at the E-Club in this fantastic venue. Joe's going to tell us a bit more about the E-Club in a while. I just want to say a couple of things at the start. I'm going to try and keep this brief because the interesting guys are the speakers. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But just a few things. First of all, because they let me stand up and do this stuff, I should say, I'm Jeff Ballinger. That's fairly easy. But I work for a company called Delta DNA. We do analytics for video games. We try and make money for games publishers. If you're interested in anything like that, talk to me afterwards. End of commercial break. But I'll have to give them their little plug. So this is Mobile Monday Edinburgh. How many people here have never been to a Momo before? Excellent, lots and lots of new blood. That's what we like. We are an international organisation. This is the Edinburgh chapter, which is fairly small, bijou and disorganised compared to some of the bigger ones, but we try. And it's focused on mobile and wireless in the widest sense. So it's everything about mobile in terms of technology, in terms of things, business and entrepreneurship, and that's really what goes on particularly at these events here. Also usability, human factors, social factors, the complete width, everything to do with mobile, and all the way down to the real hardcore networks type stuff at the other end. So the full width, we are not just say technology, so that we're trying to keep it very wide. We have a couple of groups. So if you're interested, you can Google for Mobile Monday Edinburgh, you'll find those groups. Do join the list there, they're really low volume, and every 3 or 4 months I get my act together to find some excellent speakers and a topic to build them around and have an event. So those are not lists which you get spammed on. I'm fairly careful about that. So that was Momo. So I'm just going to hand across now to Joe, who's going to tell you a little bit about the E-Club side of things. Okay. Carefully using the fun microphone.
I'll try to use it. I'll just hold it.
Yeah.
So hello everybody, thank you very much for coming along. As Jeff said, I'm Jo Young and I run the E-Club here at the Business School. Delighted to be doing another Mobile Monday this year. I think that's our second or third one this academic year, second one. Brilliant. I love it when we do these because Jeff does all the work and I just provide the wine in the room. So it makes my life really easy.
The wine's quite important.
Key component. So I'll just give you a quick overview of the entrepreneur. Been to the Entrepreneurship Club before? Just hands up. Okay, a few folks as well. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming. So the E-Club, can I just ping one across there? There we go. This is pretty much what we do. We're a networking club. We're usually always based here in the business school, and we run about 2 or 3 events a month all the way throughout the year, a little bit quieter in August because there's other stuff going on in Edinburgh. And usually what we have is very much like tonight, 1 or 2 inspiring speakers, Q&A session followed by a wine reception. Everything we do is totally free, open to anyone to come along, and is usually, as I said, always followed by a wine reception. We have about 3,000 members now because it's the E-Club's 10th birthday this year. We've been growing for 10 years. But yeah, about 3,000 members, which I think I can now quite confidently say we're one of the largest entrepreneurial networking groups in Scotland. So please do check out our website, E-Club or Entrepreneurship Club in Google will find it, or there's a link from the Edinburgh University Business School's webpage saying E-Club at the bottom. It'll tell you about upcoming events. It'll also tell you a bit about any pitching competitions that we have coming up, if there's any students in the audience, which there might be tonight, I think. And we give away cash prizes for people with their business ideas. But if you do have any other questions about the E-Club, about what we do, or just anything else, please do come along and ask me at the wine reception, and I'd be happy to answer it. But thanks very much. Jeff.
Thank you, Jim. See if I can clip this back on again without buzzing the people on the stream too much. Excellent. Okay, so mHealth and wearables is our topic tonight. It's been one of these things that's actually been around a long time in terms of when I've been involved in mobile around Edinburgh. I was thinking about it a bit. There was one local company called Mobile Healthcare Networks trying to engage mobile into healthcare since then, and have done a few interesting projects. But it's always interesting to observe how slowly these things go, and maybe that's one of the themes that we'll bump into tonight when we get into the meat of the event. That'll be interesting to see. So, focusing on challenges and opportunities, it's kind of, I always like this graphic. Is it glass half full, is it glass half empty? There are loads of opportunities around healthcare. There's a huge amount of things which They're very traditional industries. There's lots of stuff they haven't done yet. In an entrepreneurial mode, you might say they're ripe for disruption. There are also a lot of challenges. So it's an old and inflexible industry. That'll be part of the challenges. But then mobile comes in. Mobile's really an opportunity because it's a very personal device. We have these things we carry around. It's on our person. It's part of what we are. It's very connected to us. So it's just even before we get to any of the more sophisticated wearable things, it's a very close bridge to an individual. So therefore, from a healthcare point of view, it's a useful channel to that individual for lots of reasons. And then, of course, if you bring wearables into it, as we'll hear about, and I'll go for a very simple one I've got, but there's many more sophisticated ones, particularly if you look towards healthcare, then you're getting an even closer personal connection to that person, which gives you lots of opportunities to do interesting things, which might be very interesting from a healthcare point of view. So I was out at the World Congress this year, and I went to the 4 years from now sub-conference, if you like. And there was a presentation there on the future of health is wearables and vice versa, which I thought, that's a nice idea, that's interesting. And listen to some of what they were talking about. And there's a guy from Withings there, who's Withings? If you think about what Fitbit do in sports type things, then, and take the same kit, healthcare, personal health point of view, that's what Withings do. And there's a couple of other companies. They sell smart scales, they sell fitness trackers, they sell heart rate monitors, all of the usual things you would expect. So they've been doing some interesting stuff, taking it that step further and going from the consumer space where all these things are currently running and pushing it into real healthcare. And it's an interesting divide because then you hit all the challenges we're going to hear about. But what they were talking about was a study they've done with a French hospital who do cardiac care. So it's reasonably intrusive cardiac operations, so proper operations. And what they've been doing up to now, before any of this stuff came in, was they would then have a fixed schedule after an operation. Once the person's got clear of the immediate recovery and is being let to go home, there's a fixed schedule of follow-ups. And each of the follow-ups, it's cardiac, it's quite serious. That means you will see a consultant every time. It's quite a high end. 2 weeks ago, in fact, they could have been signed off the books much quicker. They're really well recovered. A bit of a waste of time. Lots of times they come in and it's, oh my God, we should have had you in 2 weeks ago because you're about to die again. The fixed schedule is not particularly good for lots of reasons. So what they've done with Withings is give everybody who has one of the operations a simple fitness tracker, which transmits data back. This is not in any way a user bringing their own device. They don't see the data. It's not in that sort of. It's a completely wired back to the hospital who's done the operation, and feeds back simple things a fitness tracker will give you. So this you can very quickly and easily discern those different cases to a fairly high degree of accuracy. So what they can then do is if somebody's recovering really quickly, they can pull them in and get them signed off much earlier. Possibly not even have a lot. They don't even have to have an hour with a consultant. It can be 15 minutes and we're done. Then at the other end of the scale, if somebody's obviously not moving around very much, then they follow up more aggressively from another point of view, or they can say come at the normal time. But it means every time the patient comes back to hospital and spends time with a consultant who's expensive, then there's a reason for it, and it's positive, and it's meaningful. So the hospital have loved it, and it's a good example of simple use of this sort of wearable technology in healthcare. And so it's interesting to see that sort of thing go. Also interesting to see Withings have recently been acquired, finally completed in. The only other thing, industry. Care is always because as a simple shape, built are much more of a big thing. Of these existing models and the vision, which again, interesting to see. So that's me, and he'll be talking from the point of view of a high growth startup, really going in. This is new things. This is real disruption. These are big ideas. We can reach for something quite different from where we are now, and it's the real startup's eye view of a journey within healthcare. So it'll be very interesting to hear how healthcare reacts to those sorts of thinkings. And at the other side, we've got David from Oracle, Oracle are an established mobile agency, also now doing a lot of IoT. They're one of Scotland's biggest. One of Scotland's biggest?
Mobile developer, yeah.
Yeah.
the biggest.
Yeah. So a big established company, profitable company, working in producing apps and services for people across multiple sectors, and that they are engaging with the healthcare industry to do all of those things. The healthcare, they're starting at that sort of, the low-hanging fruit end. Is that fair to say? But then reaching beyond. That's probably
Like
doesn't feel like it now.
But,
But anyway, you can talk.
I'll come on.
Someone talk about that later. So I'm going to ask David to come up first and talk to us about the startup journey. If she's going to pop that on.
So, hello. So yeah, my name is Chris McCann. I'm the founder and CEO of an Edinburgh-based company called Snap40. I founded this company as a medical student, so I was a medical student in Dundee. I did 3 years there before leaving to run the company full time. And before that I did a master's degree in computer science, which I suppose really gave me the impetus when I went into healthcare to think, this is a little bit different from the industry that I understand. And I think to pick up on what Jeff's just been saying, I think healthcare is an incredibly exciting industry for innovation and disruption just now. We've seen these massive changes in consumer internet and communication technologies. We haven't seen the same level of disruption in the so-called regulated markets, although it's starting to happen now to a large extent in the financial sector, but much, much less so in healthcare. When I was a medical student, and it still happens to this day, drug card dexes, when you write prescription charts for patients on wards, are still written in pen on paper. Vital sign observations are largely still taken manually and written down on paper. Electronic health records are starting to be deployed, but in an incredibly fragmented way. And there's not fantastic sharing of information. If you go into A&E, there's a good chance they won't have access to your medical records, particularly if you come in from a different area than you're normally part of. So it's an area or sector that is ripe for people to change, but it's also incredibly difficult to change. So first, what do we do? So I mentioned that vital sign observations are still taken largely manual. So as a medical student, I saw patients who would have their vital signs, things like heart rate and blood pressure, taken every 4 hours, every 8 hours, every 12 hours. And the nursing staff would diligently write that down on a piece of paper. And hopefully when things start to go awry, some kind of alert would be sent out to the clinician, to say, you should come and see this patient. In reality, it was taken so intermittently that what would quite often happen is the patient wouldn't be seen until they were already quite far down the road towards deteriorating. And I thought this was kind of crazy. Why, in this day and age, was it not automated? Why were we not able to send out these alerts automatically? Why was it reliant on nursing staff to go and take them manually? And that's exactly what we do. So we use our own wearable device. It's worn on the upper arm. We monitor patients across 7 different vital signs. We transmit that data off, and then we do data analysis to say which patient in which bed is the one that the clinician, the nurse, the member of healthcare staff needs to go and see. So this is the 4th iteration. That's why this is a CGI render of our device. This is the 4th iteration of our wearable device. So we monitor O2 sats, so how well oxygenated are you? How much or how fast do you breathe per minute? How much do you sweat? What temperature are you? How much are you moving? What are your activity levels? What's your heart rate? And also we look for relative change in blood pressure, which is one of our key innovations. This device transmits over Wi-Fi. It comes back to our cloud-based software infrastructure. We don't put anything, almost nothing, into the hospital environment. All of our processing is done away from the hospital. And we then send out early warning alerts. I think it's interesting. I don't really see us as a wearables business. I don't think wearables solve the problem in healthcare. The wearable is a part of a solution. It's not the solution. A lot of our competitors focus on vital signs monitoring. Vital signs monitoring on its own is not actually that interesting. There are 24 patients on any average ward. If you take 24 patients and you continuously monitor their vital signs, the amount of data you will generate is more than any individual clinician or nurse could ever consume and interpret. So really, for us, in our view, the wearable is about getting us data that we need to then do some level of contextualization and analysis that I guess I would have liked to know when I started. My intention to talk at people, so if anyone wants to jump in and interrupt me, please do so. I'll come on to the electronics because I think the electronics is probably the biggest part of this talk and it's one of the hardest areas. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was building a team. As an early stage company, so we're 5 people. We're based on Hill Street, which is just next to George Street. We've got a team that's split roughly 60% technical, 40% commercial. We then use subcontractors who add about another 10 people to our team, and they're really arm's length, or they're really an extension of our team rather than arm's length partners to us. But building and managing a team, and I include our subcontractors in this, we've got an incredibly complex product. We have quite a large scale software infrastructure. We have a device that is quite complex in how it works. We have a market that is class people to. Stuart, he took them to, and we've got Sally, who more expertise. But the team is accountable and have them hold you accountable as well. So we do things like all of our team are completely free. We don't have things like working hours. We don't have things, we're not interested in that. What we're interested in is what is the objective that we're trying to set right now, and let people who we think are world class at doing that go and do it in the way that they see fit. But when people don't do it, we then try and be open and accountable for why that is. And that goes both ways, so it's on me as well. We've also learned a lesson about hiring people who don't work out. We've had to make difficult decisions in the past when we've brought people in who have inhibited the business's progress rather than contributed to it. And that's made me a lot more cautious about who we hire. So we absolutely do hire at the moment slowly. And when we believe someone doesn't work out, we are very quick to say so, and we think that's best for both parties. But your team is crucial to this, and you need, especially in this business, you need a good team of people around you. It's vital. I think for this talk, the fundraising is actually really quite important. We weren't a university spin out. We didn't come out with any kind of technology. We were a market pool business, if you want to call it that. I saw a problem and wanted to build some product to sort that. My background's not electronics. I had no idea even what a printed circuit board, really was. How would we go about making that? How would we go about designing it? Zero idea whatsoever. Makes it incredibly hard to raise money because an idea is worth nothing at all. It really has zero value. People get really strung up about protecting their idea and not telling people about their ideas, but ideas are worth zero. Execution of an idea is all that matters. There were 10 different versions of Uber before Uber conquered their market, so really that doesn't matter. But how do you go from having the idea in a difficult market to getting the money to actually build an electronics device, to get the regulatory support you need to actually execute your regulatory strategy and to build the team? And for us, the honest answer here is about borrowing and stealing money from just about anyone we possibly can, from friends, from family. We've now had investment from some of our subcontractors who believe so much in what we're doing. So it's about basically stealing as much money as you possibly can to put together enough money to get to a point where you actually do have value. And we're still not there. I mean, we've now raised probably about £500,000. We've got electronics built, we've validated them on healthy patients, and we start a clinical trial next month. But we're still not at the point where we're able to successfully raise institutional money because it's kind of obvious we haven't proven this on sick patients, which is really what our value proposition is. So why would anyone in their right mind really want to put money into something that hasn't yet really shown it can deliver the value that the business is based on? So for us, it's all about getting to that point where we can actually show what our value is and thieving as much money as we possibly can through grants, through prize. So electronics. So I really hate that we do hardware. I'll give you an example. So we had a trial. I got a phone call to say, we're buggered. The Wi-Fi antenna on the device isn't working the way we expected it to. We're going to have to redesign the whole thing. And I mean, just the Wi-Fi antenna. And you're kind of sitting there on Thursday night thinking, Jesus, we were basically there, and now we're completely almost back to square one. We have to ship this electronics pack out, and it's not like it's not like software where you can make a change and rebuild it and you get it then and there. It has to actually go to be manufactured somewhere. So I really hate doing electronics because mistakes cost enormous amounts of money to fix, and it's not like you can quickly iterate through it because you have to send out manufacturing packs. It's also an area where we didn't have expertise, so we've outsourced the development of our electronics. We do all our software in-house, which is really our novel IP, but we outsource our electronics to some really fantastic electronic subcontractors. We chose small subcontractors who, they don't have a huge overhead. They are literally 3 or 4 electronics engineers in a shed, if you want to put it that way. And that makes them kind of part of our team, and we all work to a shared common goal. But I think the biggest thing I would say about the electronics is have a very, very, very clear spec of what you want. Coming from a software background, I was quite slapdash. So in software, the whole kind of lean model is you just kind of build it as quickly as you can and get it out there and see what happens. You can't really do that in electronics because, invariably, as has happened to us, you end up with a mistake and that's costly and you need to fix it. So you need to be incredibly clear on your requirements up front and not mess that up. You really need good partners who are going to work with you through it, and you need to have more money than you think you will need. I think at the start we had assumed we would go through 2 iterations. We went through 4. We'll need to do a 5th before we get to market. So everything takes, see if there was any lesson I would ever give anyone, is that everything takes longer than you ever think it will and will cost you double what you think it will cost. So you need to have a clear and realistic timeline of how long it's going to take to build those electronics. The other big challenge we've had that's not on here is regulation. So this is what makes healthcare a really difficult market to get into. Companies like Withings and Fitbit and the Apple Watch, and there's a plethora of so-called mHealth devices, which in reality are consumer wellness devices. Fitbit are facing a class action lawsuit just now because of their inaccuracy in heart rate reporting. What these devices and companies have done is effectively strayed the boundary with the FDA, which is the US regulator, and to avoid being regulated, don't offer what is considered medical advice. We wanted to do the opposite. We see ourselves as a medical company. We are a medical device and we are regulated as such, and we embrace that. But it is incredibly challenging. The level of documentation that is imposed upon us, the level of trial and testing that is imposed upon us is huge. And as it should be, this is about patient care. It shouldn't be slapdash, but it's getting harder and harder, and the bar gets higher and higher. And this makes it incredibly difficult for early stage health tech companies. There really aren't that many early stage health tech startups, very small, who haven't come out of a university in the UK, and this is one of the reasons why the barrier is just so high. And the advice I always have for people here is get a really good regulatory advisor, someone who has done this before, someone who understands the UK-US markets, but also someone who understands the unique perspective of a startup. If you go out and you get a corporate type regulatory advisor who has only worked in, say, big pharma before, they will come in and impose on you a standard that is how they have worked in pharma, but pharma has got way more money than you ever have. So you need to look at how you can get through regulatory clearance and still work as a startup and within the budget that you have. The other thing I would say is engage early with the regulators. So we are engaging right now with the FDA and have already engaged with the UK or EU, used to be EU regulators. So engage early and get their advice. I think one of the biggest things I would take away from what I've learned is people are always, health service. We find health service to help. Marketing and sales. So I'm important early, but everything you do should be about commercial system. What's done is, you're going to do is take care of that patient, and if it costs you more than that, too bad. If it costs you, for the first time ever, that really means the insurance and financial risk has shifted from the insurer onto the healthcare provider. But that creates an incredibly interesting us, because what we're about is preventing patient deterioration and saying, can we shorten length of stay as a result of that, which then allows the provider to reduce their cost base and potentially get a share of those savings. If we can also get a patient out of the bed earlier, it means the healthcare provider can get another patient in, and suddenly they've increased their revenue. And the really interesting thing is that this is already the way it operates in the UK. So the NHS trusts are already paid a bundled payment by the clinical commissioning groups in England. But you really have to understand that, because it means if you approach a CCG and say, I want to sell you this product, the CCG doesn't really care, because they pay a bundled payment for whenever a patient is admitted. From a financial standpoint, they don't necessarily care if that patient stays in for 5 days or 100 days. It doesn't matter to their cost base. It really does matter to the NHS Trust's cost base. So you start to understand who the customer is and what their financial incentive to buy is. And I think this has been one of the biggest things for me to get my head around, and it's really not easy in this market, because it's not like you're selling B2B where there's one payer. There is multiple interested parties who can influence this, and you have to get to them all. And even once you're in the healthcare, the individual NHS trust, it's not just, there's not necessarily one person who says, I'm going to agree to buy this. It's about getting the clinician support, the nursing support, the support of the e-health department, support of the procurement department, support of the medical physics department. You need to have a very wide view as to how many people will be impacted by your product, and how do we get to every single one of them and make every single one of those people be part of this and effectively want to bring the product in. And I'll leave you with my last point, which is, given the complexities of a healthcare business, the difficult market you're selling into, which has become even more difficult by the decision we took a couple of weeks ago, you really have to focus. Building electronics is hard, building software is hard, getting regulated clearance is hard, and then getting someone to buy it is hard. So you have to focus in on the most narrow product that offers value you can, and focus on nothing more than that. And we made the mistake early on of starting to think about, well, what if we took our product out into the community? What if we started looking at Japan? What if we started looking at China? You do not have time to do that. It just gets busier and busier and busier, and you have to decide what are the things we're going to focus on for the next couple of years, and don't do anything else. Just all the other exciting ideas, you need to just put them on the back foot, because you don't have time to do them, and you're in danger of basically messing the whole thing up. And as a startup founder, you kind of want to do new things. Like, it's kind of why you end up doing it in the first place. You want to do new things. So you have to really counter that urge and back off and say, what are we focused on right now? And set that mantra for your team and say, this is what we're doing. So we set as an organisation now OKRs, which if anyone runs a company should look up, because they're great. They're pioneered at Intel, and now Twitter and Google and a bunch of other companies use them. But we set these quarterly objectives and key results, which basically just say this is what, as a company, we're working on just now, and we filter them right down to individual OKRs. So everyone knows why we are doing something and how it aligns to the company's overall strategy. And it isn't big and burdensome and bureaucratic. It just really helps you focus and understand why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah, I think I might have run over time. So, thank you.
Thanks, Christopher, for that. Point about focus. I've been in a number of startups before where that part has not been done quite as well as it should have been, and it does tend to go horribly downhill at that point. So, moving on from the startup view, we'll now look a bit more about if you want to go and actually, in the short term, make a business around healthcare, in mobile, in mHealth. And so I'll pass across to David, who will tell us about that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So yeah, thank you for inviting me along today, Jeff and Joe. I thought that was an incredible talk as well. I suppose we've been on our own similar journey. First, an introduction. I'm David Romley, Biz Dev Director at Waracle. We're speaking about entrepreneurial challenges in mHealth and wearables, and also the opportunities that come off the back of them. I'm going to kind of talk to a broad agenda here today. I might do kind of a bit of traversing, so please forgive me if I do. And again, like Chris, if you feel compelled to say anything, then please go ahead. D, which I think is really interesting, our kind of journey through mHealth. There are things we can talk about to do with mHealth, and there are definitely things that we can't talk about, which is a massive shame. And that kind of brings us on nicely to the challenges of working in this context, and also the opportunities, and a bit of a view on where we think it's headed given our work in mHealth. I always start every talk I do with a big disclaimer that I'm not a healthcare professional. I haven't studied medicine. I've run an app business for the last kind of 8 years. So yeah, if I say anything that people think is incorrect, you can just accost me later on at the bar. Although I'm not a healthcare professional, I do think that a lot of innovation here in general is being driven by non-healthcare specialists and actually being driven by software developers and hardware developers. So I think that's a really important distinction. So Oracle, we're the biggest app developer in the country. We started about 8 years ago. It was my brother that started it, and my colleague Mike Wharton. We've grown to a team of about 45 now, and we specialise in mobile apps for iOS, Android, and we're now doing wearable and IoT stuff as well. So we do our kind of mobile and IoT projects in Dundee. We also do a lot of our kind of consulting and research and strategy in Dundee as well. We've now got a new stream to our business which has completely exploded in the last couple of years, which is essentially building mobile teams in enterprise organisations. So huge demand from consumers and from staff for mobile solutions, and enterprise haven't been able to recruit or retain a mobile capability, so they get us to come in and do it. So we've probably got about the best part of 20 people at various locations across the country acting as a mobile capability. So we mainly work in Scotland, UK and Europe, and our two biggest verticals by far are banking and healthcare. In general, we're quite wide. We do a lot in transportation, utilities, data centres, that type of thing, but we're a very, very data-driven company, and we see ourselves as data scientists and engineers. We don't see app development as a kind of creative pursuit. We see it as engineering, and we're very strict on our kind of agile processes as well. And yeah, we're much wider than just a kind of dev shop. We do a lot of strategy and consultation, that type of thing. Pitch over. These are some of the guys that we work with. There are also people on there that we can't talk about, and I'll come on to talk about that later on in the talk. Dundee's a really, really cool place, and if you get a chance, go up and see it. There's a really great cross-section at the moment happening between software, games, pharma, medical. We try and be right at the heart of that. There's big advantages to a small city. It's easier to network. There's a lot of trust, openness and collaboration, and we just see it as a unique mashup of skills. I don't know how Dundee has got to be in this position, but it has, and it's really interesting. So our journey, I've kind of broken it down into 3 phases. The first phase of mHealth projects that we started doing were all about process efficiency. So they're about replacing kind of archaic processes in a healthcare setting with mobile processes. And that was to do with kind of driving the cost down of delivering those services. The second phase we saw was really to do with using the mobile as an engagement tool. So if you're conducting a clinical trial or a big medical research initiative, how do you harness the power that's kind of in your pocket? How do you get people to stay in the process longer? And how do you use kind of gamification and UX techniques to do that? And that's part of the reason why I think that these kind of revolutions in healthcare are also being driven by software professionals, not necessarily healthcare professionals. The third phase is all about harnessing the sensors that are available. So we do a lot of work, sensor-based work on the phone, on wearables, IoT, even kind of augmented reality now. So the industry is maturing quickly and it's building upon all of these things. But I'll come on to speak about the kind of challenges and opportunities that take place. So things we can talk about, so we work a lot with the NHS. One of our first jobs was a patient assessment questionnaire. So previously, when assessing kind of patient feedback, someone would have to write up a survey, they'd have to print it off, they'd give it to someone in the waiting room, someone would fill it out, they'd hand it back, that data was then manually typed in. We installed a kind of tablet-based end-to-end process which completely kind of wiped that out. Because people are more used to using mobile technology, it was a tablet that was kind of handed about in the waiting room, and that's estimated to save the NHS about 50k a year. So it's a really clear ROI, and it's a good example of a kind of end-to-end tablet process in a kind of healthcare setting. We also do a lot with Imperial College London. I was interested to hear about Jeff's comment to do with low-hanging fruit. These tenders are extremely difficult to win, and we'll come on to talk about why they're so difficult. But we developed an application called InfoMatch. So ICL do a lot of medical research initiatives. They have a huge database of people, but it's administered via letters by phoning people up, which just seems completely archaic. So we developed iOS, Android, and Windows mobile apps, which was really to kind of increase the sample size, increase the throughput of people in these initiatives to try and generate better data. So this is all about kind of shortening, again, the feedback cycle between trying to involve people in medical research initiatives and actually getting them in the door. And then we use lots of clever kind of gamification techniques to keep them in the process once they're in there. So these are things like feature preference-based push notifications. So I would select studies I'm interested in, studies that I could fill out on my phone, fill out a survey to see if I was compatible or not, and I'd find out very quickly. So again, you're just completely kind of short-circuiting this feedback loop. So there's certain things that we can't talk about, and it's a real shame. We've got about 6 people employed directly by one of the biggest pharma companies in the world, doing lots of cool work across mobile, across AR, across wearable and IoT, but we're restricted in what we can say, which is frustrating to say the least. Which is a neat segue onto some of the challenges that I see and that we see in working in this industry. So big pharma and biotech are very, very competitive in terms of IP, and they're very restrictive in terms of what their suppliers can talk about. We obviously use our track record to win more business. We use it to attract staff, and if we can't, then that's an issue. But the nature of the work that we do with pharma companies, the people that are working on it absolutely love it. If you ask them working on kind of pharma or fintech, they'd much rather work on the kind of healthcare side of things. It's obviously heavily regulated. I remember having, when I had to go out and pitch over in Switzerland, I read the FDA guidelines on the plane, which was, kind of pretty heavy duty stuff to say the least. So I managed to talk a good game when I was in the presentation. But yeah, that stuff is just incredibly complicated, and you need to have kind of close collaboration with subject matter experts and legal as well before you end up getting into trouble. And these are the kind of costs of doing business that you don't anticipate when you get into the industry. A real bugbear of mine is public sector procurement processes and how stifling they are to do with innovation. It's absolutely astounding to me how slow some of these public sector organisations move and how little input the kind of end supplier has in creating the brief. So when we start a project, we speak with the client and we sit down, we talk to them, we do very iterative kind of collaborative sessions. In the public sector, they write a brief of what they think they want, and then they put it out. And you have zero control of influencing that, and you have to bid with a fixed cost and a fixed timescale, and the system is just completely broken. And what I worry about is there's going to be a big gap between innovations in private healthcare, kind of free spending, kind of competitive market forces. These guys can spend a lot more and can innovate quicker, and there's a potential to leave the public sector behind, which is potentially quite worrying. They also, big organisations in general, suffer from kind of hugely fragmented technology strategies. And what you'll find is that part of an organisation will spend a lot of money developing something, and another part of their organisation is doing exactly the same thing. The organisation kind of internally doesn't speak to each other. They duplicate a lot of spending and they duplicate a lot of technology, which makes it difficult to kind of bring everything together and do what you think is the right thing to do. You have to, a lot of compromise in these projects. You're also integrating with kind of legacy IT and software architecture that isn't necessarily conducive to kind of fast-moving, iterative mobile software. So again, these two things are a bit of a clash. And also there's a kind of module clash. We do things at 100 miles an hour. We develop super quick, and all our processes are really nailed. When we're working with big healthcare companies, it can be really, really difficult in terms of the speed we want to work at and the speed the client can work at. And given how fast the industry moves, you can't spend like a year, 2, 3 years on big healthcare initiatives. Things change. People change their habits and the way they engage with technology, so it needs to be done a lot faster. So rant over. having said that, there's lots of opportunities. Jeff kind of talked about some of the numbers, and they're just like eye-watering. We see kind of IoT and mobile as the next revolution in healthcare. And again, that's being driven by software developers and technologists. That's not necessarily coming from healthcare. Three things that we see as being absolutely huge, and three things we do a lot of work in: remote patient monitoring, so the type of stuff Chris is talking about, where you have a wearable, it's sending data to someone who can kind of predict and preempt things, and again, you're shortening that feedback loop, and that can be through mobiles, it can be through wearables, it can be through AR, that type of thing. Telehealth as well, kind of outsourcing part of automated systems, we see as a huge opportunity to get into. I think the technology is so pervasive, people are ready for that. Would people rather have go to their GP when they've got a cough and go through the kind of palaver of getting an appointment and wasting their time, or would you rather do something discreet on your phone? There's a lot of people that wouldn't, but there's a lot of people that would, so there's huge savings potentially there. And behaviour modification, when we talk about behaviour modification, we mean kind of push notifications and messages telling you to get off your arse and move about. That's the kind of software-driven part of things, where we're using kind of UX and gamification techniques in software to get people to do things. And again, that's a big opportunity in health, as that's kind of the key to prevention and preempting certain diseases. So we were at a healthcare conference recently, and Goldman Sachs came out with this huge report to do with the potential value of IoT and wearables. They estimate the total savings opportunity by implementing IoT solutions being $300 billion. So it's not exactly an insignificant number. And the commercial opportunity for IoT revenue being about $30 billion. So these are big, big numbers that we're talking about here. And the market can definitely sustain new entries, new innovation, and new disruption. So with connected devices kind of supporting healthcare studies and healthcare services and preemptive consultation, what we're seeing is it's almost this kind of neural network whereby there's more connected devices, there's more data, there's more learning, meaning we can have more insights and better kind of healthcare outcomes. So the more we create this kind of ecosystem of connected devices, the more learning we have, and benefits will hopefully kind of reach out to the patients. And also, this is just kind of reiterating my other point, we feel that, I mean, mobile is probably the most pervasive technology that I've certainly had in my lifetime. Patients are ready. We find people are ready and willing to kind of engage with healthcare services via mobile or a tablet, or let people take your heart rate and your blood pressure to try and preempt things. So again, we feel there's a huge opportunity there, and that's obviously something kind of Chris is tapping into. What we think is next. So this slide I thought was really, really interesting. It's all about the kind of spectrum of disease and where we think the money is going. So the money has been going on this part, which is all about diagnosing and treating, using mobile and IoT and things like that. We see it moving much more towards predict and preempt. So how do we actually forecast that something might happen in the future using all these connected devices? And how do we stop them from happening? Because this is the kind of costly part, right? And there was a quote that underpinned it, which I thought was particularly kind of resonant. 100 years from now, someone's going to look back and say, can you believe they waited until you got a disease and then did something? And I just think that's incredibly profound, and that could well be right, that in 100 years' time they will look back and think, why were they focusing so much on this end stage? Why weren't they, with the tools and technology they have, why haven't they been focusing on kind of prediction and preemption? So that's me, I think. Here's my details, and happy to speak to everyone in the reception afterwards.
Thanks very much, David. We're now going to move towards the questions. So actually, David, do you want to stay up? And Christopher, you want to come up as well? I'm just going to rejig the microphones for a moment. We have to keep the streaming part of the audience plugged in. So I'm going to put this up in the middle, so if you probably don't hide behind it. Spread out to the sides. So at this stage, what I usually do is try and get a conversation going. between the audience and the speakers, and I'll throw in a few questions just to cause trouble, but really I'm looking for you guys to come up with some interesting thoughts, perhaps even ask each other questions at points if things kick off in that sort of direction. So no holds barred at all. You can go with anything you think. I'm going to start with a quick question that occurred to me. I've actually got two questions. One came out of your talk, Christopher, and one came out, David, from yours, and I think they're probably the same question in the end. So what I was asking about for Christopher was specifically about that clinical trial you managed to get, and just about a process which you had to go through to get the engagement, to get them to agree to a clinical trial. Now hold that for a minute, thought for a minute. The question I was going to put to David is, how in general do you get healthcare professionals to be interested in driving innovation? So I suspect those are two sides of the same coin. So do you want to go first, Christopher?
Sure. I think firstly, it's about identifying who are the right people you want to speak to, and we've been it's almost been serendipity. Typically the people we get introduced to by nature are the people who are interested in this space, otherwise they won't be talking to the people we know. So we were introduced to a clinician in Fife who had done some research in an area that was very, very close to our heart, and the relationship just kind of grew from there. It's about putting time and effort into it, and it's about understanding what are they looking for and why, and how can we work together to come to some common shared solution. But in my experience, the doctors, the nurses, e-health staff, they're all incredibly keen to help, but you have to be willing to understand what their pains are and what their jobs are. And the doctor's pains can be very different from the e-health officer's pains, can be very different to the procurement officer's pains. And you have to understand what are each person's concerns and worries and expectations, and how can we tailor our arguments and understand really what are they trying to do.
So David, how can you draw those people out and to try to drive more of this process, which I guess is what you're trying to do from your comment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Chris has a harder job than we do in terms of having to proactively kind of BD and going out and saying, hey, that'd be a great solution. We respond to demand. People come to us because we're mobile experts and ask us to develop a solution. But even still, even when you get a tender through and it appears that everyone's on the same page, as soon as you dig under the surface, there's different people pulling in different directions. You have to deal with procurement, you have to deal with regulation, you have to deal with the kind of subject matter experts, and it's incredibly difficult and complicated, and winning the contract is literally the first thing. A lot of the times when I win a contract, I'm like, oh god, we've actually got to do this. And it can be really difficult. So I really kind of empathise you in that point of view, from having to pull everyone together. But we do find that we are approached by surgeons, we are approached by people, kind of real subject matter experts, but again, they struggle to kind of line up the ducks on their side and pull everything together. So I think because of how regulated the industry is and how big some of these organisations are, it's difficult to get everyone pointing in the same direction.
Cool. Now, any questions from the audience? Start with the...
Hi. So I'm really curious as to what do you think is the problems with connecting nutritional tracking of data, since we're talking about preventative, to vitals and activity in this landscape? Is there just no money being given to that, or I know it's dominated by consumer industries?
I think from our point of view, we get asked quite a lot about data out with just pure vital signs data, so things like nutritional information and past medical history and admissions history. It's an area we'd love to get into. I think one of the challenges is how you actually get that data, and if you're relying on patients providing it, and how does that affect the veracity of that information, and also how do you get patients to actually comply with providing that level of information. So the biggest challenge for us in collecting any of these data sets is, where does the data come from, and how do you expediently get access to it, and that's always been what's held us back from others.
So what I hear is a trust issue of the user.
Well, there you go.
And because it's so heavily regulated, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the big companies have the big regulators on their side, right? And they're more likely to be able to have the clout and the reputation to put something like that in place. It's difficult from a startup's point of view or even a small business like ours, to innovate, because you're just kind of trampled on by the regulators. That's really difficult, and you don't have that same name. You're not a kind of Bayer or a Roche or a Pfizer, so that can be difficult. And it's whether there's incentives for those companies to kind of join all that information up, because they make a lot of money off doing things in quite kind of siloed ways.
Can I add to that? Sorry, I think we're in an era where people share more about themselves than they have ever been willing to do so before. I mean, it's almost frightening, the level of personal information we share about ourselves. I think part of the challenge is, though, that information is incredibly fragmented. So you have data stored in some places in electronic health records. You have data that you might collect from wearing a Fitbit. You might have something from, say, MyFitnessPal. And how do you, there is no underlying plumbing in the way that, say, Facebook might have provided underlying plumbing for the consumer socials space. So I'm not necessarily convinced there's a trust issue. I think that trust is an important part of it, but I think patients are willing to provide the information. I'm just not convinced there's actually an infrastructure there to take that information in just now. And as a company, that might be our plan for the future.
So in terms of personalised healthcare, then it's still quite difficult. I mean, if you have to go on a certain diet for diabetes or something to monitor that.
At scale, yes. I don't think we're there yet on that.
So you couldn't link it just to simple things like MyFitnessPal.
You could, and it's something we'd like to get to. But then you have the issue where not all patients use MyFitnessPal, so where else, if your patient doesn't have that, where else are you going to get that really difficult issue, just getting patient to take medication?
Sorry, can you give name and affiliation at the start?
Talked about how the payment is to the hospital per patient per disease or whatever. So it's in their interest to solve that problem quickly, get me out of hospital quickly, or anything like that. If the world is moving towards a predict and preempt model, which has to, right, there's no other choice, because you can't afford to keep curing people. So that's the way it's going to go. Who's the customer then? Who's going to pay for a fabulous mHealth solution that predicts where I'm going to get them?
So that then shifts back towards the CCGs. So the CCGs are in England more interested in community-based care. The challenge becomes when you cross the spectrum of hospital and community care and you try and actually do something that's integrated, then it becomes a bit more difficult. What the Scottish market's been trying to do, and is now happening in England as well, is bring together health and social care into one pair. So Edinburgh City Council, which means you then have one customer who's responsible for both. But in England that's not totally the case, and the only honest answer I can give you is it's kind of murky and unclear, which is one of the reasons why we're focused on hospitals just now and not the community market. We see that as 2 years away before we start looking at the whole.
Christopher, where do you source your sensors, and where are your PCBs built, and what's the majority of your 500,000 built?
So to the first question, our sensors are largely off the shelf. We don't novel design sensors. So one of our chips is from TI, Texas Instruments. We design our PCBs in Scotland. We have so far manufactured our PCBs in Scotland. When you start to get to higher scale, it becomes a wee bit more difficult to do and to do that. Of the 500,000, most of it's almost by far been spent on electronics, and then thereafter salaries in our team.
Do you think it will continue to be electronics used on larger organisations and ecosystem for that?
This is about, so our future focus is less updated to almost personalised health. And sure, if in the future there is a way to
Sure, or is it still some way off?
well, I'm sure there is other things in the near future that are, we track about 36 companies globally just now who are very close to us. So I'm sure there are new developments that will come out almost on a weekly basis just now. It's such a hot space. But for the moment, we couldn't deliver the value we have as a business without having done our own wearables. So I don't see that changing in at least the next 2 years.
Cool. Next one.
I just got two questions. First of all, why are you building hardware rather than, say, interfacing with a vital signs monitor and just plugging into the network and getting that data that way and purely software?
Because so about 80 to 90% of patients in hospital are not connected to a vital signs monitor. Their vital signs monitors are only really deployed in either high dependency or intensive care. Vital signs monitors typically are big capex installs, and they're really bulky equipment. If you're looked up to a vital signs monitor, you've got a BP cuff, you've got a finger pulse oximeter, you've got chest ECG leads. The patient can't get up and out of the bed and be mobile. So the vital signs monitors are not really suited to an environment where the patient needs to be able to get up and get about, and they're too expensive for hospitals to deploy in such large scale.
Well, the question was about where the innovation comes from. So if I understand correctly, Chris, you were saying you've got a kind of medical and tech background, but the medical kind of drives we should do something about this, and then David, you were saying, well, the innovation is coming from the engineers rather than the clinicians. So which one of you is right?
I would completely agree with what Dave said.
Well, we've got an answer in the envelope.
I agree. I think I wouldn't have probably done this if I hadn't come from an engineering background. I'm not convinced. I said earlier on we're an enterprise SaaS business. I don't actually see why our business has to be that different to how, say, Salesforce innovated or created the SaaS market. So I think it comes from engineering. I also think that you need to have an understanding of what problem actually is out there, though, if you're going to build a business like ours. So I wouldn't have seen that problem if I also hadn't. So yeah.
And I think from my point of view, because so much of it is sensor based and it's all to do with new operating systems and new technologies, fundamentally the devs have a lot of knowledge when it comes to manipulating that, and you set them off in a direction, you give them a problem to solve within a kind of context, within these are the devices we need to use, this is the access you have to these types of sensors, and we find that's where a lot of the kind of innovation comes from, giving someone a kind of a box to play in, confining their ability to do things. That enables them to come up with ideas and pass that over to kind of healthcare organisations.
Bridging the knowledge of what can be done with the knowledge of what is not working well currently in healthcare. So next one question. So
have you heard of the biobank? Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Because they have lots of data, don't they? And they're getting more and more and more, I think.
Yes, no, absolutely. There are people who've started collecting data sets. One of the challenges we found is, particularly with vital signs, people have never really been monitored with devices like ours in the home or in the general ward. So there are no, the data sets we're looking for just now, just on vital signs. There are no data sets that exist just now of continuous streams of data. Some people have assembled intermittent data, so when the nurses go out and take vital signs, the problem then is you have to account for the accuracy of vital signs and how have they been taken. If they've been taken by the nurses, are they always going to be accurate? And that's not a reflection on the nurses, that's just something we have to consider. So when it comes to this kind of stuff like nutritional data, yes, there is stuff out there that we could start looking at. For the vital sign stuff, which is a remediate value, there's not been anything we could use. So we've had to do our own.
And you did say you were going to offer, or you wanted to offer, medical advice.
No, so we're not so much. We're not so much offering medical advice. We're not a consumer product. We're provided in hospitals by doctors, and we aren't telling clinicians this is the diagnosis of the patient. We're not telling them. We're not saying to the clinician this is what we think you should do. We're telling the clinician this is the patient we think you need to be concerned about just now. We're an early warning system. For the software engineers in the room, we do exception monitoring. That's really what we're about, and it's up to the clinician. We flag up who needs clinical review. Right. But we're not right now telling them this is.
You made some remark in your talk about, I don't know what you were talking about, Obamacare, I think, and then you said, but we're different because we want to offer that, and I thought you were talking about advice, which I thought would get you into a lot of other problems.
So
driver, wasn't it? Because of the way Obamacare has changed.
Yes. So
the financing.
I think the point I was trying to make is that typically what used to happen was healthcare providers wanted to keep you in hospital for as long as humanly possible because they were gaming the system, if you want to put it that way. The point I was trying to get to was if now when they're being paid a single payment and the healthcare provider wants to bring down the cost of delivering care so it's less than that bundled payment, we're helping them to understand who are the patients they need to see earliest, treat those patients and then get them home as fast as possible. And that then allows them to save money. But we aren't in any way trying to replace clinicians or nurses. That's not what we're about.
There are some questions on this side, which I've been not picking up on.
Chris, if the hardware side has basically been that problem because you build your own piece of hardware to get the data that you need, and the value is in the software side, some of the service providing that information back end. Have you thought about open sourcing the hardware at some point, so technically other people can build it, or?
It's an interesting idea, and there's an open source wearable out there called Angel. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. There is, or has become, a little bit of novelty to how we do some of the stuff on our device that would compromise some of our IP now. So we'd have, maybe in the future. I'm not dead set against that idea, and I do fully believe in bringing together the community to build together. But that might be a wee bit out before we got to that. But it's a really interesting idea.
James Littlejohn, and as of last week, Napier University was set up a thing called the Science Blockchain Research Lab. So Christopher mentioned this underlying plumbing. Did you sort that out?
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I know there are a lot of people working in this area. It's another one of these really, really sexy spaces just now, and we know a couple of companies that have looked at using the blockchain for electronic health records and passing information about. So, perhaps it's not an area I have enough expertise in to comment on properly.
Yeah, I noticed when you're talking about your stuff, see, all the data gets sent off site rather than being consumed locally within the care environment. So you must have issues about privacy and how you provability and all that kind of thing.
Yes,
and blockchain direction.
That depends on your geography. So the US is easier than the UK because the US is a thing called HIPAA, and HIPAA, which is basically the global gold standard for health protection legislation, kind of governs exactly how we can do what we do and gives us a really nice defined set of requirements to achieve. In the UK, we have the Data Protection Act. We're about to have some new EU data protection laws, but there's no kind of primary legislation that governs this area, so it's much more trust or NHS trust specific policy. What we do as a company is we segregate any patient identifiable information within our system. We only hold a very small part of it. We don't access that, and we only ever see anonymous patient IDs within our cloud-based system. We can't physically tell this piece of data belongs to you. That's held off at us.
David, you guys must also have a lot of concerns over that.
That's exactly the same, but we are lucky in the sense that we have the right kind of legal advice, and on the client side we get a lot of the right regulatory advice as well. So we've had to go through the whole HIPAA thing, data protection, FDA, all these things, which for us is good because we kind of get handheld through that, but there are times when we suggest something that may not be possible because of kind of regulations. So again, it's just kind of one to watch out for when you're getting into the industry.
Any more questions in the back corner?
Just my question is really to both of you. One, do you both believe in privatization? Especially when the UK is dealing with NHS.
Turn the camera off.
Because privatization, you have more investment, more money, and it's one of the biggest problems in the UK is that you're dealing with NHS. One of the big consumer market.
Well, I think in the private sector, which is potentially worse. I think that comes down to things like wage differentials. How much can people in the NHS afford to pay for your top guy or girl, and how much in a similar kind of private industry? So attracting the right talent and being able to kind of create and run these initiatives, which I see as being a bit more innovative in the private sector, that's a wage differential thing, right? You need to have the skill set and the people willing to change and disrupt things on the public side as well. So I don't know if that's something that...
Playing devil's advocate slightly, just because this drifted into one of the questions I wrote down as I went through, particularly from your talk, David. You said patients are ready for this. Mm-hmm. And my question would be, which patients? Because doesn't using mobile app technology skew the group of patients who would engage with, say, the trials? And does that then potentially skew the trials themselves? Is there a danger we have to be aware of there?
I think so, but the big pharma companies and kind of medical research institutions will make sure they have a balanced sample before they do this. I do agree that mobile technology does have very specific demographics, But that's a good thing, right? Because in 10, 20, 30 years' time, when everyone who's been brought up with mobile technology is completely familiar with it, then it becomes less of a problem. It's only for different demographics and where mobile is hit in terms of people's age, essentially.
So it's very much a long game.
I think so. Yeah.
Question from the audience?
Can I answer the privatisation?
Yeah, go for it.
Just, no, I don't agree with the privatisation of the NHS. I'm not sure that's entirely what's happening. I think some of it's media spin. But I think it's worth remembering that the US healthcare providers spend vastly more money on healthcare than we do in the UK, and yet achieve poorer outcomes than we do. I think there's an economic incentive as a society to care for your workforce because you actually want them to work and deliver care. And I think there is a slight difficulty in using healthcare for profit because, as a business, you want to provide a service that generates revenue and income that you can then use to grow that business. And at some point, patients will cost more money than that revenue is coming in, which makes it really difficult to provide some kind of... You see that with companies like the Circle, who tried to provide private healthcare services and couldn't make it economically work. So, no, I don't agree with it. I think it should be public. I think the NHS can learn things from the private sector, but I think by and large the NHS actually does pretty well with the number of patients it has to see on a daily basis, and we achieve some of the best outcomes in the world. So there is an information mismatch, I think, in understanding exactly the outcomes we achieve for our investment versus what the Americans achieve, which is really not great. So that's a blunt answer.
That seems a very good answer. I'm always told if you want to be comfortable when you're in hospital, you want to go private, but if you actually have something properly wrong with you, you want to be in the NHS.
I mean, the UK, the private hospitals don't really do acute care. If something goes wrong, they will ship you to the NHS in an ambulance, and that's it. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So next question from the audience. Lady there.
A quick question on regulation, just to get your view on it. There's a couple of things, because you're very much talking about health. I think both of you now are looking at app development. And there was a recent comment, I think, made from one of the FDA commissioners that apps are stakeholder. Then we're going to use it, within a healthcare setting. And the second point is, how do you see a return on investment? But I just wondered how you view the regulated environment at the moment for quite different areas that you're both in.
I think it's getting harder, not easier, and I think that the regulators have, and they would acknowledge this themselves, have not kept pace with the changes in technology, and they themselves are trying to work out how do we suddenly deal with this situation that someone can knock out an app basically overnight and get it approved on the App Store in a couple of days, and suddenly something is providing medical advice and it may or may not have been regulated. I think that they are starting to become stricter and stricter, and that's one of the reasons we have engaged with them rather than tried to take it on our own interpretation. And things like it's a slightly different space, but what happened with Tyrannos over in the US is made them even sharper on regulating what they term as startup companies. So I think it's a grey area still in a lot of mHealth, and it's unclear from their guidelines sometimes, and that's why I would say you have to engage with them and speak to them and rely on the media and some of their own publications.
Could you kind of clarify what you mean about the comment on kind of apps and snake oil? I didn't quite.
I was just keeping my breath, and obviously companies that we're dealing with, their biggest market opportunity is in the States. You look at your NHS here potentially as a validation model, and when you mention the companies that you're dealing with, then they're not primarily focused on sales within the UK market. That's my comment on it. In terms of, I think, if you look at some of the projects that we see coming forward from likes of the Institute for Digital Health, some of the app developments there. You can also have local app development for the NHS. We had a great example within NHS Glasgow. Pharmacy developed app, did exactly what you said in terms of cost savings, and all of a sudden Apple found out about it and totally taken off. So I think it's coming back to look at what your business model is and who's actually using it, and you're making cash from it. Ultimately, I mean, I'm maybe not phrasing it kind of correctly, but ultimately, if you've got business angel cash going into your company, there has to be a return on investment. We're not just doing it for our greater good.
Yeah. I suppose from our side, we're privately backed possible.
You're very different.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're mobile expertise. We are mobile strategy, and we're mobile development. So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that certainly working with a lot of the big pharma companies, a lot of the stuff we do is in quite controlled settings, where kind of recruitment onto clinical trials is extremely important, where retaining people in clinical trials is extremely important. So you've got a kind of captive base there, something that's easy to measure and something that's quite sticky. But to my point earlier, to do with the kind of fragmentation across these different organizations, so many companies are doing the same thing within one organization and people aren't speaking to each other. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And from a kind of the demand is there. What we would like to do is take a more kind of proactive step in helping shape companies form their technology strategy and their mobile strategy. But yeah, I mean, mHealth represents probably kind of 30-40% of our business. So I suppose we kind of hedge across lots of different industries.
I think this is the kind of conversation which could roll a long way, which is great to have. Yeah. I'm conscious of the time, so we should probably now move it outside and continue these conversations over a glass of wine. So can we just thank our two speakers, David Bromwell and Christopher McCann, for stimulating thoughts. Thank you, Jim. And thank you for coming. Please do join the mailing lists of both eClub and of Mobile Monday, and we'd love to see you all at future events. There's going to be wine outside, it's in the area out there, and we have a chat over that.